The air inside the military briefing room was thick with authority, tension, and unspoken judgments. Every eye was fixed on the young woman standing at attention near the back wall. Her uniform crisp, her posture flawless, yet her presence seemed to irritate those around her. She wasn't supposed to be there, at least not according to some of the men in the room. The brass nameplate on her chest read, Lieutenant Sarah Dawson. But to most, she was just the girl who didn't belong in a combat unit. The lieutenant at the front, a tall man with years of combat ribbons pinned to his chest, scanned the faces before him, and when his eyes landed on her, a subtle smirk curved his lips. He called her forward, his tone sharp and dismissive. "Lieutenant Dawson, I'm curious," he said, his voice echoing through the hall. "What makes you think you can stand in this room with men who've seen what war really looks like?" A few quiet chuckles followed, filling the silence like a cruel whisper. Sarah felt her throat tighten, but her expression didn't waver. She had faced worse, far worse than condescension. Behind her calm brown eyes lay a storm of memories. The sand, the screams, the endless nights of holding the hands of soldiers breathing their last. She had been through battles where the sky itself seemed to burn, where every step could have been her last. She didn't need validation. Not from him, not from anyone. Yet in that moment, every heartbeat seemed to echo louder, every second stretching thin like wire. The lieutenant folded his arms, expecting hesitation. But Sarah stepped forward, her boots striking the floor with a sound that demanded silence. Her voice was steady, low, and carried a quiet kind of power that made the laughter fade. "Sir," she said, meeting his eyes, "I served with the 173rd Rescue Division, the unit they called the Angels in the fire." The room fell silent. Every face turned toward her. The 173rd wasn't just any unit. It was the rescue team that had gone into the burning fields of Kandahar when everyone else had been ordered to retreat. They had pulled out dozens of wounded soldiers from behind enemy lines, under relentless fire, refusing to leave anyone behind. The casualty rate was the highest in the division's history. Most who went in didn't come back, and she had been their medic. The lieutenant's smirk vanished. His jaw tightened and the faint pride in his stance faltered. "You were with them?" he asked quietly. Sarah nodded. "Yes, sir. I was there when we lost half our team in the Al-Darak ambush. I was there when Captain Reeves took his last breath in my arms. I was there when we ran out of morphine and I had to choose who would live and who wouldn't. I was there when the fires came down, and we kept going, because we were trained not to leave anyone behind." A heavy silence swallowed the room. For a moment, all the ranks and titles meant nothing. What mattered was the weight of her words, the raw, painful truth of what it meant to serve. There was no arrogance in her tone, no anger, only the quiet grief of someone who had carried others through the fire and somehow survived. That was when something shifted. The lieutenant stepped back, his eyes softening. The soldiers who had laughed before now looked down at the floor, shame burning on their faces. One of them, a young sergeant with a fresh scar across his cheek, stood straighter, his voice breaking the silence. "Ma'am," he said quietly, I've heard of the 173rd. You pulled out my brother. He was in that convoy." Sarah didn't respond immediately. She just gave a small nod, her eyes glistening. The room wasn't cold anymore. It was heavy, reverent. For the first time, they weren't looking at a woman trying to fit in. They were looking at a soldier who had already paid her dues in blood and sacrifice. But her story didn't end there. When Sarah first joined the 173rd, she was an outsider. The men didn't trust her. They called her Doc Barbie behind her back, doubted her strength, her resolve. In the field, she had to prove herself every single day, carrying wounded men twice her size, running through bullets to reach fallen comrades, learning to keep her hands steady while her heart was breaking. She saw the worst of humanity, and somehow, she found her purpose in it. During the siege of Al-Darak, when her unit was ambushed by insurgents, she stayed behind to stabilize the wounded while others tried to fight their way out. The gunfire never stopped. The air was thick with smoke and screams, and every second felt like an hour. A mortar hit close. Shrapnel tore through her shoulder, but she didn't stop. She pressed her wound shut with one hand and kept working with the other. By the time reinforcements arrived, she had saved 9 soldiers, 9 lives that would have been lost if she hadn't stayed. That night, when the medevac helicopter finally lifted off, She sat in silence, covered in blood that wasn't hers, and as the lights of the base came into view, she made herself a promise. She would never let fear define her again. So standing there now, in that briefing room, facing the very same kind of doubt she had faced her entire career, she didn't flinch. She didn't need their approval. She had already earned her place, in the dirt, in the smoke, in the fire. The lieutenant straightened, clearing his throat. "Lieutenant Dawson," he said finally, his voice quieter, more measured. "On behalf of every soldier in this room, welcome." The words were simple, but they carried weight, the kind that came only from respect. The briefing continued, but the energy in the room had changed. Sarah sat quietly, her gaze fixed forward, her thoughts drifting back to the faces of the ones she had lost. Captain Reeves, Corporal Jenkins, the young medic who had only been 19. They were gone, but their memory walked with her every step, every breath. Later that night, when she sat alone under the dim lights of her quarters, she opened the small locket she always wore under her uniform. Inside were 3 names written on a folded piece of paper, the ones she couldn't save. She touched the paper softly, her eyes closing. The world would never know their names, but she would carry them for the rest of her life. And maybe that was what being a soldier really meant. Not medals or recognition, but the silent weight of remembering. As the sun rose the next morning, Sarah stood by the base window, watching the golden light spill over the airfield. She took a deep breath, adjusted her uniform, and whispered quietly, "For them." Because in the end, that's all it was ever about, not glory, not pride, but the people you stood beside when everything fell apart. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Legends of History. Every story we tell here honors the unseen heroes, the ones who gave everything so that others could live. Special request to all viewers. In the comments, write one word that describes what courage means to you. Your words might inspire someone who needs it today.